Well, hello, and an extremely warm welcome to my channel. A very warm welcome if you're visiting my channel for the very first time, and an equally warm welcome if you are a long-suffering returning viewer. Well done. So today I have been mulling over again and again and again my choices for my own personal shortlist for the Women's Prize for Nonfiction. I can't say I've lost sleep over it, but I almost have. It's really, really difficult because I thoroughly enjoyed the entire long list of 16 books. I think every single one of them, there is a really clear argument for why potentially they could win the prize. So I've had to whittle it down. And as I've whittled it down, I really have had to. The only way I could manage to do it was to really think about the criteria for winning. And they are excellence in writing, robust research, original narrative voices, and accessibility. And actually, one of the sort of for me anyway, one of the biggest discriminators I feel has to be accessibility. If we're going to tell these stories, or at least I would like to think that the winner would reach as wide an audience as possible. And that, in my view, that's only going to happen if the work is really accessible. And I think that's very difficult because some of the topics of the books that were selected for the long list are so important, and really hold a mirror up to our society. But I wouldn't necessarily personally call them accessible. The other thing I'm going to say is that I have I've allowed myself a few days to be able to stand back and think about the whole reading experience. And it's really interesting how that sort of shuffles things around in your head. So I'm sort of the books that have really kind of captivated me and totally stayed in my consciousness are also on this pile. And that, again, that's not to say that the others didn't, but it was the ones that I thought, yeah, I really remember the feeling of reading that. I remember, a lot of detail. I think that speaks volumes. So that's how I've done it. And I've got 6 because I'm assuming they'll choose 6. And I'm going to talk about them in alphabetical order. So because at some point I want to pick a winner, and I don't know, do I reveal that today? No, of course not, because it's ages away. Yeah, of course, because Simon and I are going to do that together. Simon Savage of Savage Reads, my son, he and I will read the shortlist for both prizes, the fiction and the non-fiction. Where had my brain gone then? I think it's because I really want to talk about these books, and I'm still not totally comfortable with my choices. It's really weird. You just sort of, I thought that once I'd actually put the 6 to one side, because it was 8 and then it was 6, and once I put the 6 to one side, I thought I'd feel better, but actually it's like you don't want to leave anyone out. Anyway, so yeah, I'm going to talk about them in alphabetical order of author. So the first, and this is my personal shortlist. I'm not trying to predict what I think will be shortlisted. I've chosen the books that if I was on that judging panel, I would be championing for the shortlist, as it were. So the first up is Neneh Cherry's 1,000 Threads, because I felt that in terms of it's got a really strong narrative drive. I read it very quickly. I sort of guzzled it up. It takes you to all different parts of the world, but most importantly, it's original because it shows you a very unconventional family situation. And I honestly don't think I've read about a life quite like this before. Now that's my personal reading experience. I think the story is beautifully and honestly told. I really sort of fell in love with Neneh Cherry's personality. I mean, it's not a character, it is her. And I think she was really brave, because I think she told her story, warts and all. And like some of the books actually that I've chosen, she confronts love, familial love. She writes about friendship really well, female friendship. Um, the music world is important, obviously, because it's so much wrapped up in her life, but it was more to do with how she writes about relationships, and in particular grief. I think she just does it so well, and and shows her own very human failings. So yes, I think for me this is worthy, definitely, of a place on that shortlist. The second one is The Story of the Heart by Rachel Clarke. This book I've really taken to my heart. It tells the story of two 9-year-old children, one of whom suffers a catastrophic accident, and the other one who just suddenly becomes very, very ill from being a normal little, healthy little boy. And he requires a heart transplant, and she becomes his donor. And this is a very poignant, very cleanly told account of both families' experience. But also, again, what I found really original about this book is the way that Rachel Clarke, makes it page turning. I couldn't put this down. The pace of it is brilliant, and you are jerked away from the human story at just the right moments. It's brilliantly structured, actually, to see into the medical story, because she's a doctor herself, and she's a palliative care doctor, which again is really interesting. But she tells the story of the development of heart surgery, and it's really informative in, looking at most of us at some point have experienced going to hospital. And it's a celebration as well of what a good free at the point of delivery health service is actually capable of offering. And I think that's something, I know it's very UK centric perhaps, but it's something that I think is a really important message to the rest of the world. So yeah, I am in awe of this book, and again, it clearly, in my view, deserves a place on that shortlist. Next up is a book that really took me by surprise, and I know it's been really popular. I think, looking at everybody's comments, I think this is the book that people were most familiar with in terms of my audience anyway, you lovely people out there. And a lot of you had read it and have a lot of love for this book. And it's Raising Hare by Chloe Dalton. I was spellbound by this. And again, it's a story like no other that I've personally ever read. In fact, I think it's a one-off, because Chloe Dalton, during lockdown, she was living in the countryside, in the place where she originates from in the UK, and she found this leveret, leveret of course being a baby hare, and she managed to bring it up to adulthood in her own home. And apparently that's, I think, probably a pretty unique experience. When she first rescued the hare, she tried to find out information about what to feed it, how to look after it. She questioned her vets, etc., etc., and nobody seemed to know what to do. They seemed to think it wasn't actually possible. So it's original in that sense. But I also think one of the things that she does, again, is absolute. I mean, this is really excellent writing, and what she does really well is she shows how a small animal and her relationship with this small animal completely changes her outlook on her own home, on the people around her, and in particular on the environment that she's living in. I mean, my own personal experience, it's a bit like the way that the world changes when you fall in love, or the way the world changes when you have your first child. You just see things differently. And this animal that can't even speak um, is able to transform her world. And I'm very much a sort of proponent of the transformative power of nature, and spending time in nature. So I just, yeah, hats off to Chloe Dalton. This is a beautiful book. And next, heartbreaking Ootlin, by Jenni Fagan. I mean, you know, all the books I've chosen actually pretty much brought tears to my eyes at various moments. That they're all, I don't know what that says about me as a reader, but I found every one of my choices was very emotive. And this story of a young girl growing up in Care, being passed around from pillar to post in one of the richest countries in the world. It's just breathtaking. And I don't know how she managed to sit and write this, except that it originated from a suicidal moment in her life. I think it's an act of tremendous bravery to share your darkest moments with an audience, but I can also see how important it is. And I hope that this book really opens up a further discussion about social care in any democracy, actually. The other thing I loved about this, again, is it's absolutely beautifully written. She manages to engage you with her life at every point that she writes about, and that's partly what makes it so harrowing. And yet there is no room for self-pity in this book. It's definitely not a pity memoir in any stretch of the imagination. It's a very raw and exposing account of her life, and I absolutely loved it. And then this was the big surprise for me. It's Why Fish Don't Exist by Lulu Miller. And this book, sorry, you can't see it very well. This book, didn't know anything about it. That would be true of many of the books on the list. I read it first because I wasn't sure whether it was about taxonomy. I wasn't sure whether that was going to be my thing. But I do feel that this book is particularly original. Lulu Miller is writing about a moment in her life where she has a breakdown in a relationship and she doesn't know how to resolve it. She's messed up. She feels she's lost the love of her life. And she sort of thinks about her father and one of the men, a Victorian man that her father absolutely admired. And she tells his story, and he's the taxonomist, because she is really impressed by his resilience. And her father I've forgotten his name, that's terrible. Oh my goodness, my brain. David Starr Jordan, of course. So David Starr Jordan had really impressed her own father because of his resilience. He'd collected all these millions, well, thousands at least, of different species of fish. He'd built up this massive collection of them at his university. And in the San Francisco earthquake, they were all smashed to smithereens and a lot of the labels were lost. And he had to rebuild his collection again. So she'd sort of known him when she was younger, as a child, as this sort of man who was put on a pedestal. And what she does in this book is brings that pedestal crashing down, because as she starts to research him and find out more about him, she realizes to her horror that he's anything but someone that she should hero worship. and she finds out all sorts of really, really disturbing connections that he has. For example, he's accused of murder. She hints that he may have murdered somebody, and he's got links with theories about eugenics. And what this book is incredibly original. It's original because it weaves together stories that seem to be so disparate. So I think it's brilliantly structured. But also it's the writing style. She writes in this really kind of ballsy, for want of a better word, conversational tone. And there's quite a lot of sort of dialect in here that is quite abrasive and very, very unusual. Well, unusual, it's totally original. I've never come across a non-fiction text, I don't think, that adopts that kind of tone, because it's purporting to be this informative biography of this man, and a Victorian to boot, and yet she uses very sort of modern vernacular to describe him, and I really loved that. I thought it was really clever. And last but not least, I chose Agent Zoe by Clare Mulley. I think this is, again, it's a historical analysis of Agent Zoe's life. She was a Polish resistance fighter during the Second World War. It revealed to me a whole aspect of the Second World War that I was really deeply unaware of. I think it's a very kind of women's prize book in that it celebrates it celebrates the life of a woman who really made her mark on not just Polish history, but also I think European history. And it's kind of a really adventurous, it's a dynamic adventure story in many ways. And again, I grew to really thoroughly admire Agent Zoe, and I'm really glad that her story was drawn to my attention. Again, it's beautifully written. It takes, almost comes right up to the present day, because Agent Zoe didn't die that long ago. So it takes you from from the war right up to quite recent history. And I just think it's very clever, because Clare Mulley, I'm sure, spent hundreds of thousands of hours researching this book. And robust research is one of the criteria. But unlike some of the other books I read, perhaps, you are not conscious of that research. She doesn't ram it down your throat. She doesn't, she tells this story with real vim and excitement and drive. And there's an amazing cast of characters. It isn't just Agent Zoe's story. It's the story of the resistance movement. It's the story of the promotion of women's rights, particularly in Poland. And it's enabled me to view Polish society and history very differently. So every single one of these 6 books that I've personally shortlisted has changed my perspective in some way. I've become really informed about a life or an experience or a moment in history that I was not previously aware of. And for me, that's what non-fiction should do. I personally think that good non-fiction writing should be sharing an experience, a lived experience, or an experience of a period in history with the reader. And I think that each of these 6 books is incredibly generous in doing that. And that's just my personal take. So please let me know what you think of my personal shortlist. Please let me know whether you think I'm way off beam. Please let me know whether you think you would champion, you know, what books you would particularly champion. And some of you have been doing that, and I've been really enjoying reading the comments, but also trying not to let your comments sway my own personal view, because I don't think that's fair on the books. And obviously, you know, some of them are out in different parts of the world at different times. So yeah, so there we go. Here they are in all their absolute beauty. In fact, they're quite, I can't even pick them up. They're quite a hefty pile. There we go. All those lovely. So that is I'm going to obscure my face now. That is my personal shortlist for this year's Women's Prize for non-fiction. And I cannot wait to see what the shortlist is really going to be. I could be absolutely way off kilter, but I've certainly thoroughly enjoyed reading them, and I want to say a massive thank you to the Women's Prize for their generosity in sending me all these wonderful books. I am really utterly grateful. Take care, everybody. Happy reading. Let's see what they come up with next Wednesday. I think it's the 26th, Wednesday the 26th. Can't remember what time the announcement is. I should have checked, shouldn't I? Sorry, but I think it's going to be early in the morning British time, but I'm not sure. Soz. Anyway, take care all.